Hey there, friend. Before we dive into this episode, I want to make a special invitation to you. That's something that the Real Life Process is hosting at the end of April. On Saturday, April the 27th, we are hosting an in person training for One Life Maps. I am so excited about this training that's going to happen right here in my hometown, Effingham, Illinois. It's hosted by the Real Life Process, but it will be led by the One Life Maps founding leaders, Sybil Towner, Sharon Swing, and Joan Kelly, and facilitated by our executive director, Lindsay Sturkey. This is going to be an amazing day. If you've ever wanted to engage with the maps and you like to do it with those who created the life maps, this is the event to be at. Effingham is such a fun town. It will be a one-day training, but you can come in the night before and hang out with us, and we would love to see you right here in Effingham. You can experience the Listen to My Life maps, engage in 2 of the maps out of the 8, and receive ideas and resources on these amazing tools. So come check it out. All you need to do is go to onelifemaps.com. Click on the banner right at the top to find out more about this amazing in-person event that we're hosting this year for the One Life Maps. Hello there, friend. It is great to be back with you for this episode of Doing What Matters, as we always lean into this idea of living from rest, not rush. And I want to be honest with you. How did it get to be April 1st, 2024? These first 3 months of the year moved by so quickly and yet so slowly. So it always is amazing to me how sometimes a week can feel very long or a day can feel very long, but yet the next thing, a whole entire month has gone by or a whole entire 90 days. And my pattern, my rhythm is to get up on the balcony every 90 days and just do a review, something I call a reset of my life. And so it's time for me to do that. I'm actually going to be doing that this week. I have a day set aside, nothing on the calendar that whole afternoon, and I am just going to do the balcony view and reset into so many areas. But I'm coming into it a little bit differently here in April. And part of it is from a book that I have been reading by John Mark Comer. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that back at the very beginning, back in January, my friend Nancy, who works on our team, and I did a podcast episode about reading books and the number of books that we wanted to read. And I'm doing pretty well. I'm on track. I usually have at least 3 books going at the same time. And the one I just wrapped up probably will stay in my top 10 books. And it's a book by John Mark Comer called Practicing the Way. And this read has been so impactful. His book that he had a few years ago, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, was also a highly impactful book. He wrote that and it came out about the same time as my book, Doing What Matters, Live from Rest, Not Rush, came out. And this book, Practicing the Way, has so many similar themes and similar ways that I think and that I process that it is just an amazing book. And the reason that I love it is because it leans into these ideas of being and doing. And so I want to explore that just for a few minutes here in a conversation. I literally wanted to stand up and cheer as I read this book. It was like, go, John. Just such an amazing book. And I love his writing style. But this idea that he presents in the book is that we are becoming an apprentice of Jesus. And he explores that whole idea of being an apprentice of Jesus and what does an apprentice do and all of that. But then in the second half of the book, he goes into this idea of living it out. So if we are choosing to be an apprentice of Jesus, then how do we live it out? And that's what I want to talk about for just a few minutes is that living it out piece. This idea, here we are already 3 months into the year. And are you living the year in 2024 that you want to live? It's always the question. I've been wrestling with that myself. How do I want to live? And so this book just helped me re-examine that and relook at it because I'm at a season of life here in my early 60s where the season of life is just changing. And I'm recognizing that. I'm recognizing, to be honest, that I'm still processing some grief and loss. My best friend passed away from bone cancer a little over a year ago. And it really brought back up for me some of the grief and loss that I probably had not processed through the loss of our son in 2017. And so I realized in this first 3 months of the year that I'm still navigating a lot of grief. I'm also navigating some shifts in my social circle due to friends moving away or other changes just around my friendship circle. And so those have been some difficult places that, just being very honest with you, sometimes I just have to say it out loud and recognize that, wow, I just feel a loss of friendship right now, those deep friendships, and also how much it matters to me to have a couple of really deep friends. Now, that's one thing I've been pondering these first 3 months. You may not be thinking about anything like that, but that's something I've been pondering. What I've also been noticing about this season, if you hang out with me very long right now, you'll know that I am a brand new Grammy. You'll know that I am a brand new Grammy, which is the best role ever. Our little grandson, Wesley, will be a year old in June. It is just such a joy to be a Grammy. I enjoy it so much, and I really have been just discerning, how do I want to incorporate this new role into my life? And then the third thing is that my husband, Farmer Dale, and I have been spending a lot of conversation and time talking about how we want to live the next 10 or 15 years. What do we want to do? Where do we want to be? All of these things. And I'm longing for a little bit slower pace of life that has some deeper connections. And so to do that, to ponder those things, to think about those things, one of the best practices that I have is this idea of getting up on the balcony and doing a reset. Now, I'm not going to reset everything, but I'm going to revisit those 3 areas. I'm going to revisit an area in my life called travel and recreation. That is, what are the things Dale and I want to do together and what fits into our life. Dale is still working full time. I am still working full time, but we are empty nesters, so we can be in a different place. I'm going to revisit, how do I want to navigate and process this grief that I am still holding? What support do I need? Because one of my buckets in my life, my areas of focus, is deep friendships. And to be a friend, or to have a friend, let me say, you have to be a friend. So I want to revisit that area and see what I can do there to reestablish some friendships and or find some new friendships that are deep and meaningful. I was talking with someone yesterday about friendship, and one of the things that I feel gets more difficult the older you get with friends is you have so much story that to go back and catch someone up on all of your story seems like a lot for someone. And I just have to get over that I don't have to go back and give them all 62 years, that we can really pick up just from here and make new story together. So I'm processing that. And then this idea of being a Grammy. And how does that fit into my life? So I really want to take a look at those three things. Going back to the book that I was reading, Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer, he goes into one of my favorite concepts and ideas from a spiritual way, and that is the idea of a rule of life. That what we are creating is a rule of life. And the interesting thing is, we have one, whether we want to admit it or not. So you can have a positive or a negative rule of life. You get to decide. And so if I get to decide, if I get a choice, I want to create the rule of life that does put me in that place of being an apprentice of Jesus and to align my life and the process of my life in a way that I am moving and growing spiritually and emotionally and relationally, and in the way that puts me in that place as an apprentice. So, this idea of a rule of life, and John Mark Comer has things that you can Google of the trellis and the vine. You can read about it in his book, and I talk about it in some of the work that I do. I use the same concept. So, John Mark Comer and I are on the same wavelength here of this idea that the trellis is the rule, and John goes into it in his book, the ancient word ruler, it's where we get all of that. So the rule, something straight that we grow our life on and that we attach to, and our life is this vine. So this idea of the trellis and the vine, and where am I attaching my life, and what are the practices that I am putting in? Now that all sounds great, but it's not easy to do. It takes time and work to set aside to re-examine on a regular basis your rule of life. One of the examples that John gives in his book is not only the big rock things like we talk about in the process John gives an example in his book of some of his rule of life. He even has things written in there that I would call habits and routines of parenting his phone, which I think is a funny phrase, but I love it, of the idea that his phone goes off every night at 8:30 and he puts it in a drawer. And he really has protecting himself from some of the input that's coming into his brain through television, limiting the amount of time that he's watching any social media or any TV or any screen time. And I really love that. It's something I may look at in my own life of what are the boundaries? Because I find, and I don't know about you, but I find that screens, televisions, computers, phones are the things that can suck me in from having conversation with Farmer Dale, reading a book, sitting outside, taking in the beautiful weather or the sunshine on my face or going for a walk or those things. So I'm going to experiment in this 90 days with putting a limit on the amount of time. Now that's a rule or a practice that I'm putting in that does feel much more like a rule. Most of the rules of life that we set up or desire to set up are bigger concepts than that. These are the things that matter to me. This idea of a rule of life is actually a fairly ancient practice. I talk about it in my book, um, Doing What Matters, Living from Rest, Not Rush, Using the Process. The idea of a rule of life originated with Saint Benedict back in 516 AD, and it's a framework to harmonize, to bring in how I'm praying and I'm studying and I'm working. It's a structured approach of these two intertwining questions of what do I want to be and then how do I want to live? So I often refer to the process that I created and write about in my book as a modern day rule of life. And I just want to leave you in thought around that question with this podcast. I'm asking a lot of questions about rewriting some of my rule. I don't rewrite my whole real life view, is what I call it. I don't rewrite the whole thing every 90 days, but I really feel drawn in this 90 days to revisit that role as a Grammy. So that's my family, my immediate family role, my area of focus around my deep friendships, and then my own spiritual and personal development as I walk through and really look at grief in a little bit deeper way. I want to always be honest to say we're never done with this process because of new seasons of life that we move into and new opportunities that we might have or new struggles that we might face. And getting in touch with our rule of life, doing a 90-day reset every few months can just be such a game changer for how you feel at the end of the year. So if you're feeling like I have not made the progress, I have not made movement in some of the areas I really care about, create a rule of life. Pick up my book, Doing What Matters. Pick up John Mark Comer's Practicing the Way. Get you some tools in hand to start forming your rule of life. You have one, positive or negative, you're living one out. But I say this all the time. You to choose what it looks like going forward. Throughout my book, I use a lot of quotes from the Velveteen Rabbit. And when I went back to think about this idea of a rule of life, I actually went to my own book and I was reading this chapter. I believe it's chapter 4 in the book about rule of life. And the quote that's at the beginning of the chapter from the Velveteen Rabbit, just want to leave you with this quote because I really believe this is such a powerful book and it has such a personal tie to my story with my son, Eric. And this quote, I just love it. It says, "You become." It takes a long time. By the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off. Your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all because once you are real, you can't be ugly again, except to people who don't understand. I just love the beauty of that quote. It is a journey. And by the time you are real, most of your hair is going to feel loved off. I have felt that way a little bit in the last 3 months, but I know that I am on a journey to be an apprentice of Jesus. And I want to have a way that I am doing that. I want to have a path that I am following. I want to have a rule of life. And maybe you do too. If you do, come and hang out with us. Pick up my book, join our free community, and let's do it together. Because I love that last line. You can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. And I understand. If you hear nothing else in this podcast, know that I understand. I understand the struggles, have them too. I understand the journey you're on. And I am committed to embracing it with you and being on the journey with you, friend. Thanks for listening in today as I share just even some of my own personal journey very transparently where I am. I'm getting back up on the balcony. I am looking at my rule of life, I'm leaning into these 3 areas. I have a few other areas, but I'm leaning into these 3 in the next 90 days. Come along with me on the journey. Remember, friend, that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. I'll be back with you next week on the Doing What Matters podcast.